Welcome to Start Disrupting, where we're celebrating innovators who are disrupting and creating positive opportunity in our ecosystem. Today, we're talking about real-world data and real-world evidence, data analytics, and opportunities using recently compiled data enclave around the COVID patient records. Today, I'm honored to have two perfectly positioned guests to help us figure out the opportunities, the details, and where to go. First is Alex Hanlon. Alex is director of the Center for Biostatistics and Health Data Science at Virginia Tech. She is also a professor of statistics in the College of Science at Virginia Tech. And finally, she also works closely with researchers on the Health Science and Technology campus in Roanoke, adjacent to the Carilion Clinic and VTC School of Medicine. Alex, welcome.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks. My next guest is Rich Bendis. Rich is a friend and supporter in the BioHealth Capital region. Rich is the founder, president, and CEO of BioHealth Innovation. He's a successful entrepreneur, a corporate executive, angel investor, investment banker, innovation and technology-based ecosystem development, and just all things leadership when it comes to biotech healthcare in the National Capital Region. And we wanted to bring Rich in for his perspective on the sort of the global viewpoint of the opportunity that we're seeing around big data. Rich, welcome to the show.
Brett, thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on the other end of the podcast.
That's right. Well, I'm taking my cues from you. So if I break any podcast etiquette, feel free to jump in.
You're doing great.
Let's start with the big picture. So I had a chance not too long ago, before COVID, before the pandemic, to dive in a little bit to what we consider real world evidence and frankly, the use of clinical data to support, reduce the cost of clinical studies, to enhance and accelerate discovery. So we're talking about using data in its broadest terms, whether it's electronic health records, whether it's collected data from clinical trials, retrospective data. So the opportunity now to start to mine that really seems to be accelerating with COVID. So I wanted to just get your perspective, Rich, first. What's the global opportunity and what are you seeing in these trends?
Well, actually, we started to notice this almost 10 years ago, Brett. And the reason for that was when we created BioHealth Innovation, we were trying to come up with a name. And everybody at that time was talking about biotechnology and life sciences. And if you really look at this region between Virginia, Maryland, and DC, we saw that what was happening is that people were becoming interdependent on one another in different technologies and industry sectors. And by that, we thought that the term biohealth was more appropriate because you have pharma companies, bio companies, medical device, biomarkers, tools, you had telehealth, cybersecurity, and it's all coming together now where everyone is dependent on one another. So we think that this region is really one of the epicenters around the world for that to happen, and we're all fortunate to be here. We'll get into some real live examples later of some of those things that are happening. And the other thing that we talked about briefly, Brett, was people today are looking at artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. All of those are alive and well, but sometimes people are a little confused by them. So I know you're going to shed some light on that later too.
So let's move into the next topic. And frankly, to dig into that a little bit, there were some pioneers in this field. You think about Flatiron Health, you think about Concerto Health AI, a lot of companies that were looking sort of pre-pandemic to capitalize on data collected. And now, but one of the things that we've seen is COVID has created a huge opportunity around a highly curated and database. So Alex, you have been sort of really in the front center, in the trenches, thinking about how to utilize this data, your position with Virginia Tech, as well as supporting Fralin and the Carilion Clinic. So you're positioned really nicely to be able to help us understand what's the real world application. So I'm going to start with what we're hearing about this NC3 data enclave, and tell us a little bit about the NC3 enclave, how it originated, and then what is the opportunity around that?
Sure. So to put it into context, the pandemic hit, as we all know, the United States in March of 2020. And a month later in April, the NIH announced plans to build a centralized secure enclave to store massive amounts of medical record data from people who currently were and who would be diagnosed with COVID-19 across the country. And then by July 2020, it was launched. And so this enclave that I'm talking about is part of the National COVID Cohort Collaborative. That's a mouthful. It's the N3C. And it really seeks to rapidly transform clinical information into knowledge, which can then be used to identify risk factors for the disease itself, as well as to come up with appropriate treatment options.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I will get it correct. Let me correct this, the N3C. So the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, and really designed to bring this data together. What's the scope of this data set that's been collected so far?
Right. So actually, the information that is currently available on the platform is rich, both in scope and in scale. So at last look, there were 82 hospitals or health systems that had already contributed data from more than 930,000 COVID-19 positive individuals. And this results in more than 4.6 billion rows of data. The NIH's National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, that's NCATS, they serve as the data steward and they ensure security and privacy as such. So data access is open to all approved users, regardless of whether or not they contribute data to the enclave. And then to find details for gaining access to N3C can be found on the NCATS website. Researchers can request access only after their home institution has secured a data use agreement, a DUA, with NCATS. And for those folks who want to do research using this data and are not associated with an institution, they'll need to complete their own DUA. But there are currently over 140 projects underway right now.
Awesome. Okay, so there's a lot of information there for our podcast listeners. We're going to put the links and the details in the show notes for you. So a lot of what Alex has to say gets into the access points and your ability as an investigator to apply and do a project. So we want to promote that. So Rich, let's put our investor hat on for just a minute. If I think about this being a huge data resource and a lot of opportunity for discovery, how are you seeing interest, or what do you think of in terms of from an investment opportunity and what trends companies are seeing to capitalize on this and not only develop a discovery strategy, but think about identification, new diagnostics? There's just a wealth of opportunity there. In your mind, how do you think investors would perceive this?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion around this area, Brett, and I found an article that was really good that's talking about, and you mentioned COVID-19, 4 healthcare technology trends expected to boom during COVID-19. So if you're an investor, you want to know what's going to boom as a result of COVID, right? So I was just as interested to see that too and see how it related to what's going on in our region. And so I took a look at these 4 different areas, and I'll talk briefly about them. One is predictive analytics in healthcare. And, that the analytics, even what Alex was talking about, is we're analyzing COVID patients, and there's a big, million people in that database. But, how do we look at estimating the potential of the severe outcomes for individuals? And also what to do about the vaccine rollouts in the future. So these predictive analytics are helping. And, one of the major tools we have is Johns Hopkins with what they've developed with their COVID-19 database and actually breaking it down now more geographically. So that's something that we're all aware of that's happening. And there are many spin out ideas that come from that, which will create what I would call investment opportunities. Another one, it really is connected medical devices for healthcare. And so it's the Internet of Medical Things. We all know of the Internet of Things, but this is the Internet of Medical Things. And a good example of that is WellDoc, which started in Baltimore several years ago, but they were doing remote monitoring of diabetes patients and having that data come back to a central database. So this Internet of Things, and if you look at where technology is today, there's a lot of stuff that can be done remotely, and COVID is demonstrating that we're going to have to do more things remotely than what we're going to have to do in person. Third one is, telehealth. One of the people that we've been working with closely in Baltimore as well has been Avana Healthcare, which was just recently acquired by Amalgam RX. It was a spin out of Johns Hopkins. And basically, they're developing patient-centered clinical support systems to enable physicians basically to better manage their patient portfolio, provide better quality care to them. And a lot of that can be done in a telehealth world and remotely. And that really is appropriate more for rural areas and some indigent areas as well. Last thing I'll talk about is the cybersecurity concerns. And as we get into this increase of cloud adoption in healthcare, guess what? All that data is sitting in the cloud. How do you protect it? So, and we're finding out there's a lot of breaches going on in many different sectors these days. So that's going to be a bigger challenge because, medical data, medical records is extremely important that we have to protect and keep the integrity of it. And a lot of the stuff that Alex is involved in, I'm sure, relates to protecting that data that's being captured by the NIH. So I would say that, healthcare cybersecurity is another interesting investment opportunity for people to look at. And I'll stop there because there's many other examples, Brett.
So Alex, when you and I met and when we talked originally about what you were doing, what struck me was your ability to get down to the overcoming what I might consider the real world barriers around projects like this. So for our listeners, and can you help describe what does a typical project look like? What are some of the conditions that need to be met? Because you and I talked about sort of this integration of AI, omics, data science, and you really have built a team and a capability there in Roanoke and within the Virginia Tech ecosystem that understands the practical nature of integrating disciplines, working with hospital systems, and overcoming what are maybe less technical hurdles, but very important hurdles you have to overcome nevertheless. So give us a perspective of what a real world project looks like. And, from your perspective, some of the challenges you've had to overcome to bring value out of these data sets.
Sure. So just to touch on a few. So the first thing we need to understand is that electronic health record or EHR data were not intended for research, but rather for other purposes like billing. And certainly such data are valuable and they play a critical role in the evidence pyramid. But there are many caveats that must go with the use of EHR data for research. So we must always transparently acknowledge these limitations when we disseminate our work in the literature or however we get it out there. Data source, data comprehensiveness, data quality, and consistency in collection, they're all areas that require a sound understanding as we work with the data. Also, researchers need to carefully think about characterizing the population to which generalizations of their research can be made. In other words, the population to whom inferences will apply. That's pretty important. And by definition, EHR data come from people who've interfaced with the health system. And we might reasonably expect that population differs from the overall population in some meaningful ways. So for example, people who are frequent users of emergency departments, they tend to have less access to routine medical care since emergency departments really must treat all comers. Another example are that people who undergo expensive surgeries are more likely to have better insurance policies than the general population. So we have to think about those things and really take care when we're generalizing our research findings that are based on EHR data.
So Alex, if I can interpret a little bit, one of the things that your group does and does well is to help navigate somebody who is an investigator or a researcher or even an entrepreneur looking to benefit or looking to try to find an opportunity in the data. Your group really can help navigate through the conditioning of the data, the proper data set, the powering of the study, all of these important things that make a successful project out of this data. Because if you're not careful, you can find yourself making inferences and interpretations based on poorly correlated results, for example.
Right. That's exactly right. And also thinking about it, you need to think about, data linkage, right? It's there are really all kinds of things that you have to pay attention to, and really realize the limitations that might come with the use of observational data, in particular electronic health record data. So when I do talk about, say, like record linkage, it's possible within institutions or perhaps even within health systems, but it becomes challenging when you're linking people across health systems.
Yeah.
So to illustrate the complexity of that within a system, you cannot even link an infant to its mother after birth, in a record.
Yeah.
And
So privacy and data protection. I mean, it's certainly critical in our world today, and the digital aspect of the information that's out there. And at the same time, it's a balance, because there's a lot of valuable research that can be done, and also time savings. When I think about the cost of a clinical trial, and where you could retrospectively look at a collected cohort, you can really start to design a study more effectively if you go back and look at this data. I'm going to switch over and ask Rich real quickly, what's your perspective, and how do you see hospital systems, healthcare networks? Are they sort of responding to this? Are they open to the idea of, to a lesser extent, either opening their data or monetizing their EHR records? And how do you see healthcare networks and systems that have traditionally not been in the discovery and the research world bringing data to the table to add value?
Yeah, I think that's been a challenge in the past, Brett. The reason is that generally you have two big data companies, Cerner and Epic, that sort of control the systems within hospitals around the United States, and each of them have their own platforms, and most of the times they don't communicate with one another. And then you have a lot of standalone systems in the departments within the hospitals that may not be on that main platform, whether it's Epic or Cerner. And there's a big challenge between what they call integrated versus interface. And that's how you communicate some of these ancillary department systems, including medical records, from one department to another, as well as to get it into the host system so that you have a centralized database. So I think what's happening now is some of the big companies are recognized they can't be as nimble as some of the smaller companies. And what they are doing is trying to develop the ability to either acquire or partner with some of the smaller, more innovative companies that have more state-of-the-art systems than these behemoths or giants out there who are the 800-pound gorillas sitting there at the Epic and Cerner. And I think what it's created an opportunity through this whole pandemic that we're going through right now, where communication is more critical today than it's ever been within our healthcare systems. And so I believe that there are tremendous opportunities to take advantage of with the challenges that we have now, and people are going to have to be more flexible within their systems and the way that they communicate with one another, and may have to permit, with the appropriate safeguards, the ability for communication of systems to talk to one another.
That gives us a chance to really kind of dive into more specifically. Alex, what you've done with Carilion Clinic and the health analytics research team, what lessons have you learned, and what are you seeing in terms of receptivity to collaboration around this data, and understanding their needs for privacy and providing a community service in terms of healthcare, and others who have interest in developing a research strategy around that data? There's sort of a balance there to strike. What have you learned regionally, and what do you see as the trend moving forward?
Right. So actually, our center is really one of the first collaborative, us working with Carilion in their secure research environment. This is one of the first projects that have taken place in that secure environment, right? So this is really hot off the press. And, our center is all about collaboration and team science. So to go into the specifics about a particular example of how we might have stepped into that arena, and this could be with Carilion or anyone else that might have a secure environment. is including the N3C. But, over the past year, we and many other folks out there have been working with the HR data to examine the relationship between vitamin D and COVID-19 outcomes. So what we did as a center is we initiated a project by reaching out to a group of clinicians at Carilion. We reached out to those who we thought would have the appropriate expertise to address the question at hand. That would include those in nursing, nutrition, and research as well. And we wanted to reach out to them and gauge their interests. And once they were in, then we connected with Carilion's HEARTS group, the health analytics research team that you just mentioned, Brett. And they provided us actually with training and access to the Trinetics EHR research database. And this gave us access to over 32 million patients from over 30 organizations. So really the access problem was really facilitated by forging these connections with both collaborators who have the necessary clinical expertise and access to the data, right? As well as connecting with those who are well versed with informatics, with medical coding, with data management. And these networks just really are critical to actually, executing such research projects.
That is really the key, is to help people come together and understand sort of the common goal and the collaboration, and everyone can gain benefit. So you're doing a fantastic job, Alex. Appreciate what you're doing there. Take this towards a wrap up. I want to think about our young investigators, our entrepreneurs, and the opportunity around people who are thinking about starting into this space. So, one of the things, Rich, you and I have talked about a lot is this integration of omics and AI and data science. And so, the field is merging towards this multidisciplinary integration, liquid biopsy, where you've got companies that are half genomics and half software and machine learning people. So as I think about the opportunity, and if you're a young investigator listening to this, or frankly, if you're an investor listening to this, if you're a project team in a big company looking to strike out and create an opportunity around big data, what kind of advice, and this is for the both of you, what kind of advice do you have for those investigators looking to get going into this space?
Well, I mean, it gets all the way back to the beginning, because we're getting a lot of questions of people who have interest in what was the past of computer science, saying, I want to get involved in this AI, machine learning, and quantum computing field. And it's almost like I want to be a venture capitalist. You basically just don't become a venture capitalist right out of school. You basically develop some skill sets that enable you to understand how they function. And here, it's somewhat the same with the challenges we're going through within this whole data industry right now. It is hard to find pure plays in the industry, basically, that would be only AI or machine learning or quantum companies. Even the biggest, IBM, has a quantum computing division, but they have so many other things that they do. One of these examples, Brett, in our local region is Vibrant Health, and they're in Fairfax, Virginia. And if people are looking for growing companies in the digital health world, they started in digital health. They were fortunate enough to get a contract with the National Institute of Health in a project called All of Us. And it's a 5-year program to try to get DNA data over 1 million patient samples. And that would enable them to basically look at better participant recruitment and engagement once you have that database. That would be beneficial to everybody that's doing research. It would be beneficial to pharma and bio companies looking for clinical trials and what's going on within clinical trials. So that's just an example of a local company that's growing like a weed. They've gotten significant federal contracts, and they have the credibility, but they didn't start out in that field,
Right.
So they migrated into that field based on what some of their platform technology was, because they were very good at that. And find out they're also doing a COVID-19 tracking system in addition to what they're doing with their the million US individuals, where they're going to try to get the age different, race difference, financial and health statuses to design this diverse biomedical database, which is critical to most of the decisions we're going through. So, I can tell basically, Brett, that I could go into this into many different areas for a long time, but in order to keep and respect the time of your podcast, I would say that just an advice to people who want to get into the field, okay? There is many different ways to get engaged in this field. It can be with healthcare systems and hospitals. It can be the NIH. It can be the FDA. It could be the DoD, who has a tremendous healthcare and medical and bio sector within DoD. It could be pharma and bio companies, clinical research organizations that are doing trials for pharma and bio companies around the world. And the access to these AI, machine learning, and quantum tools are just making them much more efficient. And just what's going on with our vaccine trials right now. I guarantee you, when you're doing 20 and 30,000 people trials, you need to have good databases and access to that data so that AstraZeneca can make their announcement that they're ready to go for emergency use authorization with the FDA right now. So I'll stop there, but I think that there's many different pathways for people to look at both job opportunities and investment opportunities, and our region is ripe for it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rich. And I think when I think about, Alex, what we're doing here in Southwest Virginia, Roanoke, and supporting the rest of the Virginia enterprise across the Commonwealth, my position at the CRC is to really cultivate that intersection between the university, commercialization. And I'm excited that, recently we've been funded through the Go Virginia grant to provide more access to lab space and that sort of thing. So what you're doing at that intersection with Carilion, Fralin, Virginia Tech, I mean, we are looking to support that 100%. So when I think about, one of the things Rich said was the clinical researcher aspect of this. So you are really have pioneered a way for us regionally to understand the clinical researcher perspective of the use of this data. So what advice do you have on that side of things, and advice to clinicians, and ways that clinicians can understand how to better leverage data to potentially power a study more effectively, develop a better study protocol thesis, or frankly, just put together a more engaging application to NIH, for example, to where they can do the kind of research work here in Southwest Virginia that can really move their program forward.
Sure, thanks. So thinking about this question from the lens of a collaborative biostatistician whose mission is to facilitate scholarship and really elevate or move to excellence in our health research agenda, right? So my advice to junior or younger investigators would be that first to recommend that the clinical side and the statistical side work together from the very beginning of any project. So we as statisticians need clinical researchers with scientific knowledge to ask interesting questions and to identify the variables that are relevant to the study at hand. And the clinical researchers need statisticians to design the experiment, to identify the modeling approach, and to make sure that the question at hand can be answered with the data itself. So, and then of course, when a research project involves EHR or big data, this collaborative approach really becomes even more essential. And so the analysis of EHR data requires many layers of expertise beyond statistical knowledge, such as advanced programming skills, knowledge of databases and the computing environments. And really, this then goes to the complicated ethical concerns surrounding the use of sensitive data that you alluded to earlier, Brett. So my advice to researchers who want to work in this space is to make sure that you have a strong team with expertise in all areas that are necessary. Reach out to your favorite statistician, reach out to your institution's informatics team, and make sure that you know what's in your EHR database. And this ties back to my previous comments on data usability. Make sure your outcomes that you care about are captured in the database that you're considering, and captured in a way that you understand and reflects what you're seeking to study. So if I could say it in one sentence, it would be: big data requires team science.
Big data requires team science. Well, we couldn't end on a better quote. Thank you, Alex. I will point anyone and everyone interested in this to to you and your team. I think the work that you're doing is fantastic. And the fact that you're bringing this opportunity to the table for the entire Virginia Tech, for the Commonwealth of Virginia, for the research community at large is fantastic. Thanks for being on the podcast, Alex. And we hope to have you back real soon.
Oh, thank you so much.
And Rich, and always great to have you on the show as well. Rich, look forward to talking to you again soon.
The last thing I'll say, I promise you, is that September 13th and 14th, we have our annual BioHealth Capital Region Forum. And I'd love to pick up with both you and Alex on that to see where we are 6 months from now. But the theme for that forum is going to be big bio and big data converging. So it's directly related to what your podcast is today. And we're going to continue with that theme throughout the year because it's very relevant for the BioHealth Capital Region.
Fantastic. Thank you. And as you know, Rich, our mission here at the CRC is to connect the Commonwealth sort of enterprise-wide, and getting involved in some of the projects that you have up north certainly support that mission for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And one final point is, for those of you who are interested in changing the game, we have the Global Case Challenge. So we're inviting student teams around the world. So we are hosting international student teams to take part in what's called the Global Case Challenge. What's at stake is $40,000 for a student team who will be the first place. We have 4 challenges that have been posted on our website, vtcrc.com. And you can go there and see what the challenges are. One of particular note is hosted by Carilion Clinic, and it's a really important business case challenge that has been posed by the Carilion Clinic around pandemic fatigue. So, we have first responders, we have frontline workers who have been just completely consumed with COVID and the pandemic for over a year now. And they are facing real world challenges. This whole construct of the pandemic fatigue is really important. So we are asking student teams to help us figure out how to move forward and develop programming for that. So that's just one of 4 interesting challenges for the student teams. We hope if you're a student team out there listening, you get involved. And again, vtcrc.com. So Rich and Alex, great to have you on the show today. Thank you again. We look forward. We're going to be posting a lot of details in our show notes so that listeners who are interested in this topic can get all the latest links. Thanks again for everyone. And until next time, start disrupting.